Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the USS Independence, watching the stars shift back to normal as his ship dropped out of hyperspace. The journey from Earth had taken 3 weeks, and they were now at the edge of the Kepler 442 system, a place no human had ever visited before. This was supposed to be a simple exploration mission: find new planets, take some pictures, collect data, and head home. "Captain, we're getting some strange readings," said Lisa Park from her position at the communications station. She was a young officer, maybe 25 years old, with short black hair and quick fingers that danced across her control panel. "There are massive energy sources out there, really massive." Morrison walked over to look at her screen. The readings showed power signatures that were off the charts. Whatever was out there was using more energy than entire cities back on Earth. "Can you tell what's causing it?" "Not yet, sir. But it's big. Really big." Science Officer Pete Collins looked up from his station. He was a thin man with thick glasses who got excited about everything space-related. "Captain, I'm detecting multiple objects approaching our position. They're huge. Each one is about the size of a small moon." Morrison felt his stomach drop. First contact protocols ran through his mind. Earth had prepared for this day for decades, but no one really knew what would happen when humans finally met aliens. Red alert. All hands to battle stations. Bridge crew moved quickly to their positions. The Independence wasn't a military ship, but it had basic weapons and shields. Morrison hoped they wouldn't need them. He looked at the main screen as Pete brought up a visual of the approaching objects. "My God," Lisa whispered. The ships were beautiful in a strange way. They looked like they were made of crystal, all smooth curves and glowing edges. Each one was enormous, dwarfing the Independence completely. There were at least 20 of them, moving in perfect formation, like they were dancing through space. "Captain," Lisa said, her voice shaking slightly, "we're being hailed." Put it through. The main screen filled with the image of a tall, blue-skinned being. It had large black eyes, no visible nose, and wore what looked like ceremonial robes covered in glowing symbols. When it spoke, its voice was deep and formal, and somehow the words came out in perfect English. "Greetings, primitive vessel. I am High Commander Zexthala of the Zephyrian Hegemony, speaking for the greater Galactic Empire. You have entered Imperial space without permission. Prepare to be boarded for integration into the Cosmic Order." Morrison had to bite his lip to keep from smiling. The alien's serious tone reminded him of his old high school principal trying to sound important. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the United Earth Vessel Independence. Come in peace." "And didn't know this was your territory." "Well, space is." "Imperial territory," Zexthala replied. "Your species will be evaluated for integration into our glorious empire. Surrender your destructive war implements and submit to peaceful galactic harmony under Imperial guidance." Behind Morrison, he heard someone trying not to laugh. It sounded like it came from the engineering station where Maria Santos was working. She was a tough woman from Texas who didn't take orders from anyone except Morrison, and sometimes not, even from him. "We'll need to discuss this with our government," Morrison said, keeping his voice steady. "Can we arrange a meeting?" Zexthala. His large eyes blinked slowly. "Your primitive government has no authority here. But we are merciful. We will allow a diplomatic exchange before your integration begins. We will send representatives to our flagship in 2 of your Earth hours." The screen went dark. Morrison looked around the bridge. Everyone was trying very hard not to smile, but he could see they were all fighting the same battle he was. The alien's pompous attitude was almost funny. "Lisa, get me Admiral Bennett on the secure channel," Morrison ordered. Lisa worked her controls for a moment. "Connection established, sir." The face of Admiral Kyle Bennett appeared on a smaller screen. He was Morrison's superior back on Earth. A gray-haired man with sharp eyes who had been in space longer than anyone else in the fleet. "Jake, what's your status?" "We've made contact, sir. They want to add us to their empire." Bennett raised an eyebrow. "Come again?" Morrison quickly explained what had happened. As he talked, he could see Bennett's expression change from concern to something that looked suspiciously like amusement. "They want to integrate us into their cosmic order?" Bennett asked. "That's what they said, sir. They seem to think we're primitive and need their guidance." Bennett was quiet for a moment. Morrison could hear other voices in the background. On Earth, the news was probably spreading through the fleet command already, Jake. Play along for now. Find out what they want and what they're capable of, but be careful. We don't know what their intentions really are. Yes, sir. Should I call? For backup. Negative. The Independence is our most advanced exploration ship. If they're as powerful as they seem, more ships won't help. Just gather information and report back. The connection ended. Morrison turned back to his crew. They were all looking at him. Waiting for orders, all right, people? We're going to meet with these aliens. Pete, I want you to scan their ships and learn everything you can about their technology. Maria, make sure our systems are running perfectly. Lisa, monitor all communications. Dan, you're coming with me to the meeting. Dan Miller was the ship's security chief, a former Marine who looked like he could wrestle a bear and win. He nodded. Yes, sir. Should I bring weapons? Standard sidearm only? We want to look peaceful but not helpless. Over the next 2 hours, the crew prepared for first contact. Pete's scans showed that the alien ships were incredibly advanced. Their power sources were beyond anything humans had built, and their hulls seemed to be made of some kind of living crystal that could repair itself. Captain Pete said, pushing his glasses up his nose, "These ships are amazing. They're using technology we don't even understand. But there's something strange about their weapons." What do you mean? They have energy weapons, but they seem designed to disable rather than destroy. Like they're built for capturing things, not fighting wars. Morrison filed that information away. Might be important later. When the time came, Morrison and Miller took a shuttle over to the alien flagship. The crystal ship was even more impressive up close. It looked like a giant cathedral made of light and glass floating in the darkness of space. They were met by smaller, blue-skinned aliens who escorted them through corridors that hummed with strange music. Everything was smooth and curved with no sharp edges anywhere. The walls glowed with soft light that seemed to come from within the crystal itself. The main chamber was huge, with a ceiling that stretched up so high it disappeared in the glowing mist above. High Commander Zex Thala stood on a raised platform in the center, surrounded by other aliens in similar robes. "Welcome, primitive humans," Zex Thala said. "You stand now in the presence of the greater Galactic Empire. Today marks the beginning of your species' elevation from barbarism to civilization." Morrison had to work very hard to keep a straight face. The alien's dramatic speech reminded him of bad movies he'd watched as a kid. "We appreciate the opportunity to meet with you," he said politely. Zexala gestured to the aliens around him. "Behold the representatives of species who have already joined our glorious empire. They have found purpose and meaning under our guidance." Morrison looked at the other aliens. They all looked different from each other and from the blue-skinned Zephyrians, but they all had the same expression. They looked bored, really bored. This was going to be an interesting conversation. High Commander Zex Thala raised his long arms and began what was clearly a prepared speech. "For 10,000 years, the greater Galactic Empire has brought peace and order to the chaos of space. We have lifted 17 species from the darkness of primitive existence into the light of civilized purpose." Morrison nodded politely while Dan Miller stood beside him, trying to look serious. The problem was that everything about this situation felt like a play where everyone was taking their roles way too seriously. The aliens around them swayed slightly as Zex Thala spoke, like they were listening to music only they could hear. "Species finds their natural place in our great design," Zex Thala continued. "The Krillians, with their 6 arms and patient nature, tend our food gardens across 1,000 worlds. The Vorthan, blessed with perfect memory, maintain our records and laws. The Nexari, with minds like living computers, calculate our trade routes and resource distribution." Morrison glanced at the alien Zex Thala was pointing to. The Krillians did indeed have 6 arms, and they looked like they would be good at farming. The Vorthan had large heads and serious expressions that suggested they enjoyed paperwork. The Nexari looked like giant praying mantises wearing tiny glasses. "About your own people?" Morrison asked. "What do the Zephyrians do?" Zex Thala's chest puffed out with pride. "We are the guides, the teachers, the wise ones who show others their path. We discovered the secret of galactic harmony long ago, and now share this gift with all we meet." Don Miller made a small noise. That might have been a cough. Morrison shot him a warning look. That's very generous of you, Morrison said. But what if a species doesn't want to be guided? The chamber fell silent. The other aliens stopped their swaying and stared at Morrison. Zexthala's large black eyes blinked several times. Want? Zexthala repeated the word like it was foreign. To him, this is not a matter of want. This is a matter of natural order. Every species has a purpose. Every purpose serves the greater good. To resist this truth is to choose chaos over harmony. But what if we're happy with our chaos? Morrison asked. More silence. Then Zexthala made a gesture, and one of the other aliens stepped forward. This one was shorter and rounder, with gray skin and 4 eyes. I am Administrator Quelix of the Borthok Collective, the gray alien said, in a voice that sounded like he was reading from a script. My people once thought, as you do, we believed in what you call individual choice. But the Empire showed us the wisdom of organized purpose. Now we manage supply chains across 30 sectors. We are useful. We are content. Morrison looked at Administrator Quelix's 4 eyes. 3 of them looked content, but the 4th one looked like it wanted to be anywhere else in the galaxy. See? Zexthala said. The Borthok found their calling. As will you. Tell me, what are your people's natural abilities? What do you do well? Morrison thought about it. Humans were good at a lot of things. They were good at building, fighting, exploring, creating art, solving problems, and generally being stubborn about everything. But looking around at the other species, he got the feeling that wasn't what Zexthala wanted to hear. We're explorers, he said finally. We like to see new places and meet new people. Excellent. Zexthala clapped his hands together. You can be our scouts. You will go to new systems and identify species ready for integration. A perfect role for a wandering people. Don Miller made another coughing sound. This time it was definitely not a cough. But what if we want to keep exploring for ourselves? Morrison asked. What if we want to make our own choices about where to go and what to do? Zexthala's expression became patient, like he was explaining something simple to a child. Captain Morrison, your species is young. You have not yet learned the burden of unlimited choice. When every being does whatever they wish, there is conflict, there is waste, there is suffering. Under our guidance, every being knows their purpose. There is no confusion, no conflict, no waste. No freedom either, Don Miller said quietly. Every alien in the chamber turned to look at him. Zexthala's head tilted to one side. Freedom, he asked. What is this word? Morrison felt a chill run down his spine. These aliens literally didn't understand the concept of freedom. They had organized their entire empire around the idea that everyone should have a predetermined role and be happy with it. Freedom means being able to choose your own path, Morrison explained. Being able to decide for yourself what you want to do with your life. But why would you want such a thing? Asked one of the Krillians. Choice is difficult. Choice causes pain. When the Empire told us we should grow food, we no longer had to worry about what to do with our lives. We simply grew food. It was peaceful. What if you wanted to do something else? Don Miller asked. What if you wanted to be artists? Or scientists? Or musicians? The Krillian looked confused. But we are not good at those things. We're good at growing food. The Empire's tests showed this clearly. Morrison was starting to understand how this empire worked. They tested each species to find out what they were naturally good at, then made that their permanent job for the rest of their civilizations. Existence. It was efficient, but it was also horrible. What happens if someone doesn't want to do their assigned job? He asked. That does not happen, Zexthala said firmly. Our psychological conditioning ensures that every being finds joy in their purpose. They are grateful for the clarity we provide. Psychological conditioning? Morrison repeated. Of course, we cannot allow the chaos of individual desire to disrupt galactic harmony. Each species receives the mental adjustments necessary to embrace their role. It is painless and permanent. Don Miller's hand moved toward his weapon, but Morrison caught his eye and shook his head slightly. They were outnumbered and outgunned. This wasn't the time for a fight. That's very thorough of you, Morrison said, trying to keep his voice calm. But humans might be different. We're pretty attached to our individual desires. Zextala waved a dismissive hand. All species say this at first. The Vorthan insisted they were too independent to accept guidance. The Nexar claimed their minds were too complex for adjustment. Even the Borthok argued for their precious individual choice. But in the end, they all found peace and purpose. Long did it take? Morrison asked. The process varies. Some species accept their role quickly within a few years. The Nexari took nearly a century to fully embrace their destiny as living computers, but they are much happier now. Morrison looked at the Nexari again. They did look calm and peaceful. They also looked like they hadn't had an original thought in decades. We would like to return to our ship and discuss this with our crew, Morrison said. This is a big decision for our species. Of course, Zexthala said graciously. But do not take too long. The integration process works best when begun quickly. Delay only increases the adjustment period required. As they were escorted back to their shuttle, Morrison and Miller walked in silence. It wasn't until they were safely back aboard the Independence that either of them spoke. Captain Miller said, "Those aliens are completely insane." Morrison nodded. They've built an entire empire based on the idea that freedom is a disease that needs to be cured. What are we going to do? Morrison looked out at the crystal ships surrounding them. We're going to figure out how to get out of here. And then we're going to warn Earth that we've got a big problem. Back aboard the Independence, Morrison called an emergency meeting with his senior staff. The conference room was small but comfortable, with a large window that showed the alien fleet still surrounding them. The crystal ships looked beautiful against the stars, but now Morrison knew what they really represented. "All right, people," Morrison began. "We've got a situation. These aliens want to turn us into their newest collection of pets." Pete Collins adjusted his glasses nervously. "Captain, I've been analyzing their ships while you were over there. Their technology is incredible, but there's something strange about it." "What do you mean?" Their weapons are designed for capture, not destruction. Their ships can merge together to form larger vessels. Their power sources are based on something I've never seen before. They're using controlled dimensional rifts to generate energy. Maria Santos leaned back in her chair. "Dimensional rifts? That sounds dangerous." "It is," Pete said. "But they've somehow made it stable. It's like they've learned to safely harness the power of folded space itself." Morrison turned to Lisa Park. "What about their communications? Anything interesting?" "They're using quantum entanglement for instant communication across space," Lisa replied. "Their entire fleet is connected in real time. But Captain, there's something else. I've been monitoring their internal communications, and they're not just talking to each other." "What do you mean they're talking to their ships?" "The ships are alive, or at least semi-live. The crystal hulls are some kind of living technology that responds to their thoughts." Dan Miller shook his head. "So we're dealing with aliens who have living ships, dimensional power sources, and weapons designed to capture entire planets." "Great." "It gets worse," Morrison said. He told them about the psychological conditioning and the Empire's plan to assign humanity a permanent role as scouts. "They want to brainwash our entire species?" Maria asked. "They don't see it as brainwashing," Morrison replied. "They think they're helping us find our true purpose, genuinely believe that freedom is a problem that needs to be solved." 8 was quiet for a moment, then spoke up. "Captain, what if we showed them our technology? Maybe if they understood our capabilities, they'd reconsider." "What capabilities?" Dan asked. "Our ships are tiny compared to theirs. Our weapons are primitive chemical rockets. Our power sources are basic fusion reactors." Morrison thought about it. The Independence was humanity's most advanced ship, but compared to the alien technology, it looked like a rowboat next to a battleship. Still, maybe Pete was right. Maybe a demonstration would buy them some time. "All right," Morrison decided. "We'll show them what we can do. But we need to be careful not to provoke them." 2 hours later, Morrison was back aboard the alien flagship. This time, he had brought Pete and Maria with him. Zexthala greeted them in the same grand chamber, but now he seemed impatient. "Captain, Morrison, have you made your decision? Will your species accept integration into the Galactic Order? We're still discussing it, Morrison said. But we thought you might like to see what human technology can do. Maybe it would help you understand us better. Sextala. His large eyes showed interest. You wish to demonstrate your primitive capabilities? This is acceptable. It will help us. Determine your best role in the Empire. The alien fleet moved to an area of space filled with asteroid debris. Morrison had requested that the Independence be allowed to show its abilities, and Zextala had agreed, probably thinking it would be amusing to watch the primitive humans play with their toys. Observe, Zextala said to the other aliens gathered. Around the viewing screens, the young species always wishes to show their crude tools before accepting their place. Morrison tried not to smile. He gave a hand signal to Pete, who was standing near a communication device. Independence. This is the captain. Begin the demonstration. On the screens, they could see the Independence moving toward a large asteroid. The human ship looked impossibly small next to the alien vessels, like a minnow swimming with whales. Will your vessel do? Asked Administrator Quellix. Will it attempt to move the asteroid? Just watch, Morrison said. The Independence fired a single missile at the asteroid. It was a standard chemical explosive, nothing fancy. The missile struck. The rocket exploded, breaking it into several smaller pieces. The alien observers made sounds that Morrison assumed were the equivalent of polite applause. Impressive use of chemical propulsion, Zextala said condescendingly. Your species shows promise in basic engineering. This confirms our assessment that you would make excellent scouts. We're not done yet, Morrison said. The Independence moved to another asteroid, this one much larger. Instead of firing a missile, the ship extended what looked like a simple mechanical arm. The arm touched the asteroid and began to spin it. Curious, said one of the Nexari. Why are they rotating the asteroid? It's probably a primitive mining technique, suggested Acrylian. But Pete was watching his instruments carefully. Captain, power levels are rising in their ship, he whispered to Morrison. Something's happening. The asteroid began to spin faster and faster. The alien observers watched with mild interest, probably wondering what the humans were trying to accomplish. Then something unexpected happened. The asteroid began to glow. What is that? Zextala asked, leaning forward. The glow got brighter and brighter. Then, in a flash of light, the asteroid disappeared completely. Where it had been, there was now a perfect sphere of empty space, like someone had cut a hole in reality itself. The alien chamber fell silent. Every eye was fixed on the screens, staring at the impossible sight. How did they do that? Whispered Administrator Quellix. Morrison tried to look surprised. Oh, that. We call it a microsingularity. We use them for waste disposal sometimes. Waste disposal? Zextala's voice was higher than normal. Sure, Maria said casually. When you're exploring deep space, you can't just leave garbage everywhere. So we compress it into a tiny black hole and let it evaporate. Very clean, very efficient. Pete pushed his glasses up his nose. The process is pretty simple. You just need to spin the matter fast enough to overcome the electromagnetic force holding the atoms together. Then gravity takes over and collapses the whole thing into a singularity. You create black holes for garbage disposal, one of the Nexari asked. Only little ones, Morrison said. The big ones are for power generation. The aliens stared at him. Power generation? How else would you run a starship? Maria asked. Fusion reactors are fine for planets. But when you need to fold space for faster-than-light travel, you need something with a bit more kick. Zextala was making rapid calculations on a device that looked like a crystal calculator. Energy. Requirements for controlled singularity creation. The precision needed for safe handling. The technology to contain such forces. He looked up at Morrison with something that might have been fear. Your species routinely manipulates gravity itself. Doesn't everyone? Pete asked innocently. We use dimensional rifts, Zextala said quietly. We learn to access other dimensions for power, but controlled singularities that requires mastery of space-time itself. Morrison was beginning to understand. The aliens had learned to poke holes in reality to steal energy from other dimensions. It was impressive, but it was also like using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. Humans had learned to create their own pocket universes and harvest the energy directly. Would you like to see our defensive systems? Morrison asked. Your defensive systems? Sure. We've got some interesting ideas about gravitational shielding. And our quantum entanglement communicators are pretty neat too. Extella was now consulting. Frantically with the other aliens, Morrison caught fragments of their conversation, words like impossible and advanced and dangerous. Captain Morrison's Extella said finally, "Perhaps we should discuss your species' role in the Empire more carefully. Your technology is more sophisticated than we initially assessed." Morrison smiled. "That's very kind of you to say, but really this is just basic stuff. You should see what our military ships can do." The alien commander's blue skin seemed to get a little paler. Military ships. Oh yes. The Independence is just a science vessel. Our actual warships are much more advanced. In the silence that followed, Morrison could hear the sound of the alien empire's confidence quietly cracking. Zexthala was quiet for a long moment, staring at the empty space where the asteroid had been. The other aliens were whispering among themselves in their various languages, and their translation devices were working overtime to keep up with all the panicked conversations. Captain Morrison, Zexthala said finally, "We would be honored to visit your vessel and observe your technology more closely. For scientific purposes, of course." Morrison nodded. "We'd be happy to show you around. Fair warning, though, some of our equipment might seem a bit strange to you." "We are prepared for primitive conditions," Administrator Quellick said, though he didn't sound as confident as before. An hour later, a small group of aliens was aboard the Independence. Morrison led them through the ship while his crew watched. With barely contained amusement, the aliens kept looking around nervously, as if they expected something to explode at any moment. "This is our main corridor," Morrison explained as they walked. "Nothing fancy, just basic transportation." The aliens were examining the walls with handheld devices that beeped and flashed. "Captain," one of the Nexaris said, "these walls appear to be constructed from compressed neutron material." "Oh yeah," Morrison said casually. "We found that regular metals weren't strong enough for deep space exploration. So we compress normal matter until it's dense enough to withstand the stress of folding spacetime. It's pretty standard construction material for us." Pete Collins, who was walking with the group, added helpfully, "Each square inch of the hull can withstand pressures that would crush a normal planet. We learned that the hard way when we first started experimenting with gravity wells." Zexala stopped walking. "You experiment with gravity wells?" "Had to," Maria Santos said, joining the conversation. "When you're trying to figure out faster than light travel, you need to test different approaches. We probably created and destroyed about 50 small solar systems before we got the math right." "You destroyed solar systems?" "Only uninhabited ones," Morrison said quickly. "We're not monsters. We always scan for life before we test anything dangerous." "How considerate," Zextala said weakly. They reached the ship's computer core, where Lisa Park was working. The aliens gathered around the central console, which looked surprisingly simple compared to their crystal technology. "This is our main computer," Morrison explained. "Lisa, would you mind showing our guests how it works?" Lisa smiled. "Sure thing." "Captain, computer, please display current navigation data." A three-dimensional hologram appeared in the air, showing a detailed map of the local galaxy. The aliens stared at it in amazement. "Your computer can process galactic-scale navigation in real time?" one of the Nexari asked. "This is just the basic model," Lisa said. "We use quantum processors that exist in 17 different dimensions. Simultaneously? Each dimension handles a different aspect of the calculations. Then they combine the results in normal space." 17 dimensions? Zexthala whispered. "We started with just 3, Pete explained, but we kept running into processing limitations. So we kept adding more dimensions until we had enough computing power. 17 seems to be the sweet spot for most applications." The aliens were now consulting their devices frantically. Morrison could see them trying to understand what they were hearing, but the numbers weren't making sense to them. "Computer," Lisa continued, "please show our guests the communications array." The hologram changed to show a network of connections stretching across the galaxy. There were thousands of bright points connected by glowing lines. "What are those points?" asked Acrylion. "Those are our other ships," Morrison said. "We've got about 3,000 vessels exploring different parts of the galaxy right now. They're all connected through quantum entanglement, so we can communicate instantly no matter how far apart we are. 3,000 ships, Exthala." His voice was barely audible. "Give or take," Morrison said. "We launch new exploration missions every few months. Humanity is pretty curious about what's out there, and these are all science vessels like this one," Administrator Quelix asked. "Most of them. We've got a few colony ships setting up new settlements, and some mining vessels. Working on resource gathering? Oh, and there are the defense ships, but those are classified." "Defense ships?" Zextala asked. Morrison looked uncomfortable. "Well, I probably shouldn't talk about those. Military secrets and all that, please," Zextala said. "We are simply curious about your defensive capabilities." Morrison seemed to consider it. "Well, I suppose I can tell you about the basic systems. Dan, you're our security expert. Want to explain our standard defensive measures?" Dan Miller stepped forward. He had been trying not to grin this entire time, but now he looked serious. "Our basic defense is gravitational shielding. We create a field of warped space-time around the ship that deflects incoming attacks." "Deflects them how?" asked Anexari. "By bending space itself," Don explained. "Any projectile or energy beam that tries to hit us gets caught in the gravitational field and redirected. It's like trying to shoot at something through a funhouse mirror, except the mirror is made of folded reality." The aliens were very quiet. Now, Morrison could see them trying to process this information and failing. Of course, Dan continued. "That's just the passive defense. If we're actually under attack, we have more aggressive options, such as..." Zextal asked, though he looked like he didn't really want to know. "Well, we can create temporary wormholes to redirect enemy attacks back at them. Or we can generate localized time distortions that slow down incoming weapons while speeding up our own responses. In extreme situations, we can even phase shift the entire ship into a parallel dimension until the danger passes. Phase shift into parallel dimensions." Administrator Quelix repeated faintly. "It's not as complicated as it sounds," Pete said helpfully. "You just need to vibrate the ship's molecular structure at the right frequency to slip between dimensional barriers. The tricky part is making sure you come back to the right dimension when you're done."
Happens if
the Sam for sack frecklings for the side of now like was so you have some "Wrong dimension?" asked Acrylion. "Usually nothing too bad," Morrison said. "Maybe the laws of physics are slightly different, or history went a different way. We've learned to check for major discrepancies before we fully phase back into normal space." "You have experience with alternate dimensions?" Zextala asked. "Some," Morrison admitted. "We found a few versions of Earth where things went differently. There's one where dinosaurs never went extinct, and another where humans never invented the wheel. Fascinating places, but we don't interfere. Prime directive and all that." The aliens were now having a heated discussion among themselves. Morrison could hear words like impossible and nightmare and retreat being translated by their devices. "Captain Morrison," Zexthala said finally, "these defense ships you mentioned, any of them do you have?" Morrison looked uncomfortable again. "I really shouldn't say. It's classified information." "Please," Zexthala said. "We need to understand the scope of your military capabilities." Morrison sighed. "Well, I suppose it's not really a secret. We've got about 500 ships in. the defense fleet. But they're much more advanced than the Independents. Better weapons, stronger shields, faster engines. Some of them can exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. 500 military vessels, Zexthala said quietly. That's just for Earth's local defense, Morrison said. Each of our colonies has its own defense fleet. And then there's the deep space patrol ships that keep an eye on the really dangerous stuff. Dangerous stuff? Administrator Quelix asked. Black holes that are too active. Stars that are about to go supernova. The occasional space monster, Morrison said casually. You know, the usual hazards of deep space exploration. Space monsters? Several aliens asked at once. Oh yeah, Maria said. We've run into a few creatures that live in the vacuum of space. Most of them are pretty harmless, but some of the big ones can swallow entire moons. We've learned to give them plenty of room. The alien delegation was now huddled together, whispering frantically. Morrison could see the panic in their eyes as they tried to process everything they had learned. These primitive humans weren't primitive at all. They were technologically advanced beyond anything the Empire had ever encountered. The alien delegation huddled together for nearly 20 minutes, speaking in hushed tones while their translation devices struggled to keep up with the rapid conversation. Morrison and his crew waited patiently, though Pete kept adjusting his glasses and Maria was trying very hard not to laugh. Finally, Zexthala separated from the group and approached Morrison. The tall blue alien looked much less confident than he had a few hours ago. His ceremonial robes seemed to hang differently on his frame, as if the weight of new knowledge was pressing down on him. Captain Morrison, Zexthala began carefully. We may have made some incorrect assumptions about your species. Oh, Morrison tried to look surprised. What kind of assumptions? We believed you were a young, primitive civilization in need of guidance, but your technology suggests otherwise. Zexthala paused, choosing his words carefully. How long has your species been capable of space travel? Morrison thought about it. We first left our planet about 200 years ago, but we only developed faster-than-light travel about 50 years ago. We're pretty new to this whole galactic exploration thing. The aliens exchanged glances. Administrator Quelix stepped forward. Captain, in 50 years your people went from basic space travel to mastering gravitational manipulation and dimensional physics. We're fast learners, Pete said modestly. Plus, we had some help from a few extinct civilizations we found along the way. Their databases taught us a lot about advanced physics. Extinct civilizations? One of the Nexori asked. Sure, Morrison said. We found the remains of maybe 20 different species so far. Most of them destroyed themselves in wars or accidents, but they left behind some really interesting technology and scientific data. Zexthala was calculating something on his crystal device again. 20 extinct civilizations with advanced technology, and your species learned from all of them. Good at adapting, Maria said. No. When we find something useful, we figure out how it works, and then make it better. It's kind of our thing, make it better, Administrator Quelix asked. Well, yeah, Lisa said. We found one species that had figured out basic dimensional rifts like you use. But their method was really inefficient and dangerous. Improved the design and made it safer. You improved dimensional rift technology? Zexthala's voice was getting higher again. Wasn't that hard, Pete explained. The original design tried to force open holes in space-time. But we realized it's much easier to just convince reality to bend a little bit. Instead of breaking dimensional barriers, we negotiate with them. Negotiate with reality? Several aliens asked at once. Reality is more flexible than most people think, Morrison said. If you ask nicely and show the proper respect for the laws of physics, you can usually work out a compromise. The alien stared at him like he had just claimed to have conversations with mathematics itself. Captain Morrison, Zexthala said slowly, Your species talks to the laws of physics. Not exactly talks, Maria said. It's more like we've learned to work with the universe instead of against it. Most civilizations try to force reality to do what they want, but humans discovered that it's easier to find solutions that reality is comfortable with. That's impossible, one of the Nexari stated flatly. Physical laws are absolute. They cannot be negotiated with. That's what we used to think too, Pete said. But then we realized that the laws of physics are really more like guidelines. They're willing to bend if you approach them the right way, and if you're trying to do something that makes sense in the bigger picture. Skstala looked like his entire worldview was crumbling. Your species has formed a partnership with the fundamental forces of the universe. I wouldn't call it a partnership, Morrison said. More like a mutual understanding. We respect the universe, and it lets us do some pretty amazing things. This is why your technology seems so advanced, Administrator Quellick said quietly. You're not fighting against natural laws. You're working with them. Exactly, Lisa said. It's much more efficient that way. There was a long silence. Then Zextala asked the question that Morrison had been waiting for. Captain Morrison, what is the true size of your civilization? Morrison looked uncomfortable. Well, that's a complicated question. Please, Zextala said. We need to understand. Morrison sighed. All right, but remember that you asked. Earth itself has about 12 billion people. But we've established colonies on 600 planets across this part of the galaxy. Total human population is somewhere around 2 trillion people. 2 trillion, Zexthala repeated weakly. Give or take a few billion, Morrison said. We're still expanding pretty rapidly. New colonies are being established every month. And your military? Administrator Quelix asked. We don't really have a traditional military, Dan Miller explained. Every human ship has defensive capabilities, and every colony can protect itself. But we've got about 50,000 ships dedicated specifically to defense and exploration. 50,000 ships, Zexthala whispered. Most of them are smaller than the Independence, Morrison said quickly. But they're all equipped with the same basic technology. Gravitational shielding, dimensional processors, quantum communicators, that sort of thing. And they're all connected through your communication network? Asked Acrylian. Of course, Lisa said. Every human ship and colony is in constant contact. If something threatens one of us, all of us know about it instantly. The aliens were quiet for a very long time. Morrison could see them trying to process the implications of what they had learned. They had thought they were dealing with a small, primitive species that could be easily integrated into their empire. Instead, they had discovered a massive, technologically superior civilization that treated the laws of physics like negotiating partners. Captain Morrison, Zextala said finally, the Greater Galactic Empire would like to revise our initial offer. Oh, Morrison tried to look interested. What did you have in mind? Instead of integration into our existing structure, we would be honored to establish diplomatic relations with your civilization, as equals. That's very generous of you, Morrison said. Out. But what about your empire? What about all your talk of galactic harmony and predetermined roles? Zextala looked embarrassed. Perhaps our approach has been too rigid. Your species has shown us that there are other ways to organize galactic civilization, ways that we had not considered. You mean ways that include freedom of choice? Don Miller asked. Yes, Zextala said quietly. We are beginning to understand that our methods may have been ... limiting. Administrator Quellick stepped forward. Captain Morrison, would your people be willing to share some of your knowledge with us? We would like to learn these new approaches to technology and governance. Morrison looked at his crew. They all nodded slightly. I think we could arrange something, but it would have to be a fair exchange. No more talk about integration or predetermined roles? Agreed, Zextala said quickly. We propose a formal treaty between our civilizations, trade agreements, technology sharing, mutual defense if needed. Mutual defense? Morrison asked. Your species has encountered 20 extinct civilizations, Zextala explained. If there are forces in the galaxy capable of destroying such advanced species, perhaps it would be wise for all surviving civilizations to work together. Morrison considered this. It was actually a good point. If something out there was dangerous, enough to wipe out civilizations with advanced technology, then cooperation might be the smart choice. I'll need to discuss this with Earth's command, Morrison said. But I think they'll be interested in your proposal. As the alien delegation prepared to return to their ship, Zexthala approached Morrison one last time. Captain May, I ask you? A personal question? Sure. When you first met us, did you know that your civilization was more advanced than ours? Morrison grinned. We had a pretty good idea. But we wanted to see what you were all about before we made any judgments. And what is your judgment? Morrison looked out at the crystal ships surrounding them. I think your people have good intentions. You just went about things the wrong way. But that can be fixed. Zextala nodded gratefully. Thank you, Captain. Morrison, I believe this meeting will change both our civilizations for the better. As the aliens departed, Morrison turned to his crew. Well, that went better than expected. Think they'll actually change their ways? Maria asked. Maybe, Morrison said, but if they don't, at least now they know better than to mess with humanity. Lisa looked up from her communications console. Captain, I'm getting a message from Earth Command. Put it through. Admiral Bennett's face appeared on the screen. Jake, how did the negotiations go? Morrison smiled. Mission accomplished, sir. The Galactic Empire has decided they'd rather be our friends than our rulers. How did you manage that? We showed them our vacation photos.